Our fourth summit. It's our second year doing it virtually. And every year it's a chance for students to learn about climate change, environmental justice, green careers, also to meet other students and take initiative by creating climate action plans for their schools. But based on your feedback, we have made some changes over the years. We've made the event more youth-centric, both in planning and in speaking. We've also placed a greater emphasis on the climate action planning portion, dedicating time each week to that. That's also why we decided to launch the summit this year during the Department of Education Civics Week. So you'll be hearing from a couple students a little later today about youth voting. But we're also conscious of the education landscape right now. As y'all know, we're 2 years into COVID at this point, and it's been a challenging 2 years, and it's given us an opportunity to reflect on ourselves, our city, our neighborhoods, and our schools. So we really wanted to hone in on that localized aspect this year and showcase climate action that's happening in our boroughs. On that note, I want to throw up a quick quiz to test your New York City DOE knowledge. So I'm going to pull up a couple polls here. All right, the first question. How many schools are in New York City? Over 1,800, over 1,900, over 2,000, or over 2,100? So we got to be pretty quick with these polls here. So I'm going to close things in about 5 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm ending it. If you didn't get to it, that's okay. We're going to have a couple more. All right, so here's what people's guesses were. And the majority of you were correct. The correct answer is over 1,800. So that's a huge amount of schools, right? So that's 1,800 schools where we can make positive change, 1,800 schools where we can take on climate action planning. All right, next quiz is coming up. The question is, how many meals per day are served by the Department of Education? All right, I see some guesses coming in. Don't think too hard, just get a guess in. All righty, oh, a lot of guesses here. I'm gonna close it in about 5. Okay. So what did people guess? Oh, a lot of people guessed 1,150,000. It is actually closer to 1 million. And again, that's an enormous amount. So we want to think about, like, how can we continue to provide free, healthy meals while also minimizing food waste? Maybe as part of your climate action plan, you could focus on doing a waste audit at your school. All right, we've got our final quiz here. So I'm launching it now. Question is, how much does the Department of Education spend per year to power our school buildings? 289 million, 300 million, 312, or 317? So get those guesses in. You got about 5 more seconds here. All right, so the majority of you guessed correctly. The correct answer is 312 million. So again, we've got these enormous numbers. So thinking about how can we reduce our energy consumption? Do you see any places in your school where energy could be reduced? So these statistics obviously share the massive amounts that we consume, but also the huge potential we have for change. I'd encourage you to check out some of the other ways that schools in New York City are taking climate action by reading our office's annual report. So that link is going to be in the chat as well. But it's not all fun polls and statistics. Some statistics are not as happy. So environmental justice shows us that some neighborhoods are hotter, have more highways and polluting power plants, and are more prone to flooding. And some neighborhoods have less access to fresh food and park space. So we want to spend some time at the summit discussing and brainstorming how we could address some of those inequities. Now, with this more localized borough focus this year, it's also important to acknowledge the land politically designated as New York City to be the homeland of the Lenape, who were violently displaced by colonialism over 400 years. The Lenape are a diasporic people that remain closely connected with this land. And we also want to recognize that New York City currently has one of the largest urban Native American and indigenous populations in the US. I'd encourage you to learn more about the Lenape. One way you could do that is by visiting the Greenpoint Public Library's Lenape Hoking exhibit. It's the first Lenape curated exhibition of Lenape cultural arts in New York City. So that link is in the chat. But I'd also encourage you to check out the Lenape Center who curated that exhibit, and their link is also in the chat. And you may also want to think about how you can incorporate Indigenous acknowledgement and land into the climate action plans you'll be working on later. And on a similar note, are there any other populations you haven't considered who you can work collaboratively with on your climate action plan? So are students with disabilities be included? Are English language learners? So with that food for thought, I am going to pass the baton to a member of our Youth Leadership Council, Gabrielle Augustin-Orcel. She's a senior at Edward R. Murrow High School in Brooklyn, and she's been hugely helpful in the planning. And she's going to be leading our plenary and going through some further logistics with you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Augustin-Orcel. Most people call me Gabs. I joined the Youth Leadership Council because I wanted to make an impact in my community and meet new people who are passionate about climate action. So thank you all for being here. So today we are going to start off with opening statements, then we will have our opening preliminary, then we'll hear from some students for Civics for All, then we'll have climate action planning, and then we'll close things out. All right, so in addition to today, we also have other virtual summit days as well. All of them will be from 3:30 to 5 each day. We will have a school and a youth-led organization speak at every meeting, and we will include action planning as well. We will have a career day, which will include 6 young people working in sustainability in New York, doing quick 5-minute presentations, and then time for Q&A. At a minimum, please come to the opening day or today, your school's borough day, and the closing day. You're highly encouraged to come to days where your borough isn't located. We will put the link so you can view the full schedule in the chat. So now I'd like to introduce our plenary speakers. This plenary is an opportunity to hear from a variety of youth voices working in climate action and climate justice. Their words will help frame our thinking throughout the Climate Summit as we make observations in our school communities and work on our climate action plans. Each speaker will speak about their content area for 5 minutes, then I'll ask them some questions, and then we will turn it over to you, the audience, for questions. So we have Meera Dasgupta, who is the 2020 United States Youth Poet Laureate. She's the youngest appointed in the history of this country. She's also the first US Poet Laureate to have been appointed from New York and is the first Asian American Youth Poet Laureate of the United States. She is born in Queens and is a fierce advocate for climate change action and gender equality, having worked throughout the city on various projects in order to empower youth and young women within her own age. And then we have Ajani Stella. Ajani Stella is a 15-year-old member of our Youth Leadership Council. He's a climate activist and founder and president of Kids Fight Climate Change, a youth-led nonprofit dedicating to educating the youth about the climate crisis. Ajani attended the United Nations Climate Conference, COP26, in November 2021, and was an observing NGO delegate with the Human Impacts Institute. As a part of his climate change work, Ajani is a climate storytelling intern at Columbia University's Teacher College and has participated and moderated panels about climate education and action, and has spoken about his work to numerous organizations. So Meera, I'll let you go first. You have the floor.
And sorry, I just want to interject real quick. Daphne Frias was supposed to be on the plenary, but she had a last minute emergency. So she unfortunately won't be joining us, but I highly recommend that you check her out. All right, thanks. So Meera, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think if we could begin sharing the slides, that would be great. Yeah, thank you so much. So hi everyone, my name is Meera and I will be discussing eco-artivism and what is it and how can you be involved. So next slide. A little bit about me is that, as was said by that amazingly wonderful introduction, I was the United States Youth Poet Laureate in 2020. And since then, I've been working at the intersection of climate and art in addition to policy, because I do believe that through uplifting lived experiences and narratives within our legislative frameworks, we could create sustainable solutions that propel a just, green, and equitable transition for all. Next slide. Yeah, so what is eco-artivism? Eco-artivism is essentially creating advocacy-based artwork for the purpose of raising awareness within climate justice-centered spaces. So this can be through the expression of lived experiences, as I've mentioned before, to showcasing one's relationship with nature. Personally, I'm a proponent of the fact that there is no such thing as bad art or writing. There's only practice, and continuing to practice and evolve in terms of your artwork, in terms of your advocacy and activism moving forwards. Because I think something that I've seen is that even the label of what an activist is has changed, and some people don't like defining themselves as that or even as a writer until they feel ingrained within their communities as well. And personally, I feel like art is a means to revolution or a community revolution, because by embodying radical joy and by calling to hope via art, you're showcasing that no matter what is happening within climate spaces, and no matter all of this news that you're hearing in terms of climate anxiety, you're still willing to move forward and imagine new futures, because that's what creation is, making something out of nothing, even when everything is telling you otherwise. And next slide. So this was me in 2019 versus 2021. My first performance was actually on climate. I had no idea what spoken poetry or spoken word poetry was until I went to a workshop with the Climate Museum on a whim. Just randomly, I decided that because I was in my school speech team or speech and debate, I thought that perhaps by writing poems, I would get better at speaking or reciting other people's poems. And that's when I realized how much I loved art as a means to impact policy and legislative work. And I'm wearing the same dress. 3 years passed, nothing seems to have changed in terms of the background, but with my personal growth and how I've grown as a person, art has helped develop that. Because really, not all art is meant for the stage. Sometimes you write and draw or paint for yourself. And I think that's important to embody, especially in the climate space, because I know that you're viewing a lot of stimuli externally, and art can be a means to self-care as well. And moving forward to the next slide. So these are some images that I took from Glasgow, because I and Ajani were actually at COP26 with our organization, the Human Impacts Institute, the Youth Advisory Board. And this was from one of the larger strikes that was happening. And as you can see these signs that are losing Nemo, or solidarity with the strike, or about the global South being priced out of COP26, empty seats at the table. And in a way, protest is another form of art and creativity, because you're making your voice known in a means that is through, whether this is through words or the way in which you present things. And I think that something else to keep in mind is that on March 25th, there's going to be another strike in New York City. So that's a way in which you can get involved and utilize art to showcase your voice and to be heard as a young person within climate spaces. So next slide. And these are some photos of Ajani and I at COP. So we were essentially utilizing our voices in our capacities in order to continue moving forwards in terms of climate action, because I do believe that climate justice is social justice. And in a way, by including intersectional environmentalist perspectives through the narratives that we imbue, I think that's another way in which we can create this legislation moving forward in terms of fossil fuel non-proliferation, for example, which we need to move towards in terms of 2030, because 2030, it's not just a goal, it's a deadline and a responsibility. And I know that now it's fallen to the youth in terms of it feeling like it's an obligation for us to push in the climate movement, because I know that they always talk about the future of youth and that this is for youth's future, that we have to move in terms of climate. But the fact is that people are being impacted now. The climate crisis is something that is ever present. And we need to see that and understand that and uplift the voices which are underrepresented within negotiatory spaces. Because I like to say that it's not about bringing chairs to the table, it's about re-establishing and reforming the table as it is, because these voices have historically been barred, and we must create something and must create a table that is more inclusive. So next slide. And it's a perfect transition to this, but the environmental movement is intersectional, and intersectionality was coined from Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an amazing professor. And she discussed intersectionality is how different aspects of your identity can cause you to either have privilege in a certain manner or less privilege in many different ways. And I know that the climate crisis disproportionately impacts many communities, whether that is the global South or women of color, etc. There's many people who are impacted, and we must call to that. I know that in terms of Indigenous perspectives and youth, Indigenous leaders, traditional forms of knowledge, they're not uplifted where they should be, because we consider statistics and facts in a box when we have to expand our understanding of what is needed and what is necessary in discussions, because narratives are irrefutable. These forms of knowledge which have persisted for centuries are irrefutable. So we must hold to them and must be closer to them more than ever as we're moving forward in terms of our innovation and as we build towards the next year and towards COP27. Next slide. So that's why we need you, and we need all of you, and your voices are valued as individuals, as people, as artists. And to reiterate again, I said that there's no such thing as bad art. There's no such thing as bad writing, because you never know who you might impact. During that first performance, which I was mentioning before, a complete stranger came up to me and she told me that I had given her a voice. I used to always have stage fright, and I had a lot of social anxiety, which is funny because I'm speaking here today and it does not seem like that because I've been rattling on for the past few minutes. But art made me stronger and it made me braver into the person who I am. And I think climate justice, you have to forgive yourself and be caring and kind to yourself in these spaces too, because you need to prioritize yourself. And the work that we do is ever evolving. You might not start out as a public speaker, but someday you will get there and you will be the voice that you want to see. You will be the person on the TV who you wish you had, who you wish represented you. And I think that's the most important thing, because you are the change you want to see. And uplifting one individual life is equivalent to changing the world. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Alrighty, so Ajani, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Meera, for that very inspiring and amazing presentation. All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see this? Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ajani Stella, and as Gab said, I am a youth climate activist and that focuses on climate education and climate action. So a bit about me. I've been a climate activist since I was in the 5th grade when I had my first speaking engagement. So something that I always like to talk about when I'm talking about climate activism and bringing in the movement, we're not starting as teenagers. We're not starting as adults. We can start as young as 5th grade or 4th grade or 3rd grade. That's because I learned about climate change. I learned about its importance and how it's going to affect me. And I learned about how it's already affecting millions of people around the world. And now I'm the leader of a nonprofit organization, an observing delegate to COP26, and a known speaker across the city. We all have our own voice. I found my voice at a young age, but that doesn't mean that that it's too late to find your voice. It's okay, like Meera said, to be afraid of standing in front of a big crowd, but that's not how everyone has their impact on the planet. It could just be conversations that you have with your friends and your family. It could just be how you hold yourself in meetings and your jobs in the future. It could just be how you live your life. But we all have the ability to be climate activists. So on that lens of encouraging everyone to be climate activists and to participate in this movement, I have founded Kids Fight Climate Change, a youth-led nonprofit organization that is dedicated to climate education and climate justice. So our goal and our slogan is made by youth, built for youth, as you can see on the screen. So what that means is our leadership team is made up of entirely young people that are dedicated to teaching other young people, made by youth and built for youth, about the global climate crisis. But what we do is we don't just focus on what's the problem. We focus on how they can lead the solution. We want everyone to realize that climate change is affecting them, but they can have an effect on the world themselves. We need a youth-focused and a youth-led climate change educational organization, and I can't stress that enough. The reason I founded Kids Fight Climate Change is because I've noticed a gaping void in climate education. There's so many organizations doing great work, working on climate education policy and big high-level initiatives. But what we're doing is we're forgetting about the youth that are actually being impacted right now by the lack of climate education. You're all here of your own volition, and this is amazing. But we represent a fraction of the over 2,000 New York City public schools, as we just learned on the poll earlier. We need to utilize youth ingenuity and youth creativity across our entire world, rather than just focusing on policy initiatives. So to that end, Kids Fight Climate Change creates engaging content that teaches youth about climate change, and we also work with teachers and educators to bring climate change directly into classrooms. For instance, I'm working on a long-term project with an elementary school in Albany right now, where I'm doing talks and we're working on projects with these fourth graders to help them learn about climate change and what they can do. So I've talked a lot about climate education, and I want to address why I think it's important, because I notice a lot of people say that climate education is too long-term of a task to focus on right now. And that's definitely a problem. We need climate education yesterday. The IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released their report last week saying that climate change, the effects are here and we need to act now. They said the effects of climate change are unequivocal and the science is unequivocal, and that if we don't act now, we're going to miss a rapidly closing window to save our planet. So how can we justify investing in our kids in the kids of this world when we need this action? Well, I think that climate education is not mutually exclusive. We need to have kids learn about climate change in schools beyond just science class. We need to make kids activists now and in the future, because all the great work that some politicians, activists, kids our age are doing, we need that to continue. We need that to be able to pass on to the next generation. And then they can teach the future elementary middle schoolers about this, and they can pass it on. Climate change is not going to be fixed in a day, and our solutions can't just happen over a single day. We need to utilize self-motivated learning and teachers, like we're doing with Kids Fight Climate Change. So I want you to all answer in the chat while I continue. How or hasn't climate change played a role in your classes? I think this is a really important question. I'm really curious to see your responses. While you're answering that, I'll move on to the next slide. So as Gabs mentioned, I was an observing delegate at COP26, and that was with Meera. And at COP26, we both met with policymakers, we met activists, we met both famous ones and just people we met on the street. And it was such an incredible experience. Of all things, of all things we learned, something that really stuck to me was the incredible inequities between rich and poor countries. And what I mean by this is rich countries dominate the climate conversation, and they're the ones that cause climate change. And they have a vested interest in keeping the fossil fuel production alive. Meanwhile, lower income nations are facing the effects of climate change right now. For instance, a conversation that I still think about is with Cote d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, which is a West African nation. They're told me how they're being forced to shift age-old agricultural habits to account for drought in one area and heavy rainfall in another. They told me how they're trying to invest every dime they can spare in their people, yet the funds that are promised from the developed world is not coming. We need to address these inequities, and we need to center stories like Cote d'Ivoire in the climate narrative, in the policy narrative. So to that end, I'd like you to also answer this question in the chats. How do you think we can make future conferences like COP27 more equitable? In terms of what I think that we need to have a more holistic view. The image that I have on the bottom here was a great panel that talked about climate finance and climate action. Yet this panel was talking about how we're already doing great things, how we're already investing so much money in climate solutions and climate adaptation. That's not true. We're not investing enough. We need, if all this money were true, why isn't Cote d'Ivoire seeing any of this money? Why isn't Cote d'Ivoire seeing these solutions come and help their people? So it comes back to storytelling. And Meera put it so beautifully. We need to center the stories of those affected the most. So I think that one of the best ways that we can make COP26, COP27, COP28 more equitable is by just listening to the stories of those that actually need to be listened to and taking action on that. Not just giving them a seat at the table, but giving them our ears. Another great strategy that we all think about is public engagement. So we think about protests or big assemblies or stuff like this, the Youth Climate Assembly. But public engagement can take a great many forms. So public engagement is really just defined as how we involve individuals in climate action and climate solutions. So that includes protests, education, environmental justice. So that environmental justice is a really complicated topic, but just to briefly touch on it, it's making sure that minority, indigenous, and global South perspectives and youth perspectives are heard. It's making sure that we handle the injustices present in our system that so that climate change disproportionately impacts those groups. There's also citizen assemblies, and the UK Climate Assembly is a great example of that, as you can see on the top picture. And I actually just interviewed for a podcast one of the main organizers of the UK Climate Assembly. Sustainable consumption. It's not my favorite form of public engagement just because it puts so much focus on the consumer, but it also allows us to put pressure on corporations to change their habits, to move away from fossil fuels, to move away from using those 5 layers of plastic packaging that I know we get in the mail. So what I want to leave you guys with is we need to think about all areas of climate action. We need public engagement. We need citizen assemblies. We need protests, but we also need to think about the future. We must think about how we can engage the youth of right now, how we can engage the teachers and the educators to start that sustainable shift, that just transition earlier. We're already doing such a great job of that by just being here, but we need to do more. If you want to reach out to me, you can. I can drop these emails in the chat. The Kids Fight Climate Change. You can just go to kidsfightclimatechange.org. Thank you so much for having me here, and I can't wait to hear your questions. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Meera. I'm sorry, Meera and Ajani. So I want to first ask you both an individual question, and then I'm gonna have you both answer a general question. So Ajani, my question to you is, what drives your youth climate activism?
That's a really great question. I think and it's a complicated answer. I think what drives me is actually my constant questioning of what we're doing. And so often I wonder, what impact are we really having? We keep having these assemblies, we keep having these protests, and what legislation, what outcome are we seeing? We just keep getting report after report of how it seems like our doom is imminent, right? But then I remind myself of all the great work that's happening across the world, all the policymakers that are actually trying to make a difference, all of the activists, all of the students, all of the leaders, all that are working to try to make a difference, that are working to create the just transition that I mentioned. And that's what keeps me going. And that's really what keeps me going as a youth activist, because we need to remember that we are in this together. It might seem like that we are not having an impact, but we really are. And we have the ability to change the world.
Very nice. Thank you, Johnny. All right, Meera, my question for you is, how can we better engage underrepresented groups in the climate change conversation?
Yeah, I feel as if something that is very present within negotiatory spaces or in discussion spaces is tokenization. And I think that meaningful engagement is important in terms of bringing voices to the forefront of the climate movement, because it's not about just allowing or making space per se for people to speak, but allowing for their decisions, ideas, and concepts to be directly incorporated into policy work on an intergovernmental level. Because I know that even on the local level and grassroots level, historically, women of color, as it is Women's History Month, to bring that into perspective, but they have been leading these movements within nonprofits and on the local level and macro scale, while they're also not given the same space in terms of determining our decisions. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that, and in our own lives, because I know that there are corporate actors, there are legislators who must do that work, because those groups or people who need their voice represented should not have to fight to have their voices represented, first of all. But I think in our own movements, in our own lives, by uplifting their work, by moving and empowering different groups and different communities that are under resourced with the resources that they do need, due to the fact that a lot of things have been historically prescient in terms of the reason why these communities hadn't gotten resources in the first place. I think it's just a myriad of solutions, because there's no one good solution for one region, as there's many different regions. And I think just going back to the intersectionality of it all, as long as we incorporate an intersectional perspective into our environmentalism, I feel like that's the first step forward in terms of acknowledgement, even though next and most importantly, we need action.
Thank you. All right, so now my question for both of you are, students here are going to be creating climate action plans for their school communities during the summit. What are some key things that students should think about as they plan?
I can start, yeah. So I think there's a couple things that are really important. And the first is just really general. Think outside the box. A lot of times when we're designing climate plans, and I'm guilty of this too, we think of the cookie cutter middle and high school response, right? Recycle. That's the main one that I really dislike. So we're going with recycle. And I could go on for hours about how recycling doesn't have a big impact on the climate crisis, but I think that's enough. What we should really focus on is figuring out how you can grow your environmental community in your school to encompass the entire student body. How you can expand interest about climate change and climate action, climate justice to more than just the green team. So how can you do that? That's really school to school, but just some general ideas are focusing on things like climate education. It's really hard to incorporate that on a school-wide in curriculums, but you can try pitching it to the administration, develop a good case, and I mean, the worst they can do is say no. And what you can also do though is work with individual teachers to try to incorporate climate curricula on maybe just a day of their class. Work with your social studies teacher to talk about civic action. Maybe if you're talking about civil rights movement throughout history, then that's a great way to talk about climate action and climate activism. And in your science classes, I mean, that's an obvious in, right? Climate science. Even in math, you can talk a bit about the science or about climate policy solutions and such. But thinking about how you can engage students through classrooms and through possibly an assembly event that you organize with your green team are really exciting ways beyond just the traditional recycling.
Nice. Meera, would you like to add on?
Yeah, so I just had some technical difficulties. So if you could repeat the question, I just came back into the room.
So everybody here is going to be doing some climate action planning for their communities. What do you think are some key ideas that they should have as they do their planning?
Yeah, so I believe that there are micro actions where there's also macro ones, and every single action matters, because I think that's something that is prevalent, is that there are different levels of privilege in terms of what you can do, because different people are at different levels of capacity as well. So I think doing the best that you can in your individual capacity is already so important. Of course, you can start with the individual actions, which are often commonly stated within your own household and the way in which you experience and live your own lives. But I think the most important part right now is moving and bringing your voice to the forefront of movements in terms of legislation and policy, because I know that there's a lot of spaces that are opening up in terms of youth engagement. Currently, I'm on the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force with UNEP, and we're writing a policy paper for Stockholm and the UN conference, which is happening in the summer. And that's one way in which getting involved is possible. I know that there are strikes and protests, which you can also get involved in. I think that having civil disobedience, it is important in terms of getting the word out, but at the same time, that protest, the way in which you march, has to translate into, again, those legislation or tangible actions which will influence a larger scale of change. I think that in the current moment, especially as well, moving towards March 25th, there are many larger actions. I think that mobilizing in your own spaces is so important, and understanding that the climate crisis is also an interdisciplinary movement, because we all have our own passions. Like, I am very passionate about art and policy and legislation, which is why I'm speaking from that lens. But you might be very interested in coding or technology. Perhaps you're someone who's interested in sports, or like Ajani, you're interested in climate education. There's a multitude of ways to get involved. And if you find that lens and find that intersection of what you are passionate about and climate, I think that you're going to cause, or rather, I know that you're going to cause a tangible change, because people will see that you're passionate about what you do. And then through that, that's how movements are made, and that's how futures are built, from one person to the next and one step to many. So that is what I would say in response to the question.
Thank you all for your insights. We'd like to open it up for audience questions. You guys can put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll unmute you. All righty. Oh, sorry, Pat. You can go. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I saw a couple come into the chat, so we can start there. So either of you can respond to this. So Mark asked, do you believe that enveloping reformation to our school's education system is something in the near future? So he gives an example, adding additional resources and curriculum for learning about climate change. And do you believe these ideas are well known among students?
Meera, you can go ahead since I went first last time.
Oh no, I felt like this is more geared to you in terms of climate education, which is why yeah, if you wanted to go, then you can go.
Sure, yeah. So
No problem. Just
yeah. So that's a really great question. I think that there's an important distinction between reformation and like a step towards a progressional step, right? In terms of the systemic reformation to our education system, that speaking about climate change, I know our education system needs to be reformed, but that's a separate issue. But I think that we're not as close as we should be, but we have made great steps. There is growing support, for instance, in the New York legislature for mandated climate change curricula. And that's a really great step. I worry about it going all the way through, especially since legislative priorities have been rightfully so distracted with the war in Ukraine right now. But I think also we need to be really careful on the emphasis that we put on legislation and what the Board of Regents tells us to do. Because, for instance, we've had art and music as a supposed mandate in New York State schools for years now, yet because of lack of access and privilege, there's so many schools public schools that don't have art and music. So when we talk about climate education legislation, we need to be careful that we need to also focus on the implementation. In terms of the second part of your question, are younger students aware? I think that's a really good point, because no, I don't think students are aware that climate education is A, necessary, and B, that they're pushing for it right now. Because while we have we do have great awareness, after all of you here are really engaged and informed about this movement, there's so many students who don't think that climate change is impactful or is impactful to them or is going to affect people right now. So we need to put legislation in a two-pronged approach. Like I was saying, we need to have mandated curricula. Yes, but we also need to work in classrooms with students. We need to partner with teachers to really engage with youth right now. And that's how we can really achieve that reform that you were talking about there.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add on because Ajani said so much amazing things. But yeah, in terms of, I know that I was talking about policy for a while, but per the second statement, because I think that was something that we are considering in the current moment. I mean, Ajani and I, with our Youth Advisory Council, with the HII, are working on a climate education centered children's book, for example, to bring that understanding or bridge that understanding in terms of resources to young people. But I feel as if we're all aware of climate change in a way. We all understand that it's happening, or we feel that it's happening, because clearly there are these changes, and there might not be an extreme focus on it, but we're all aware. And I think that awareness, even though it is, like I was saying before, an important first step, because when you realize that something of that scale is happening to you, can be scary, but simultaneously it can be motivating in terms of all the work that you're doing. But I feel as though the most important thing is, again, bridging those resources, because as Ajani was mentioning, there is a disproportionate way in which our resources are currently distributed across a variety of systems. And we need to figure out a way in which we can change that distribution to be more inclusive, and so that more people have the opportunity in order to not only understand climate change or understand the solutions or the ways that they can get involved, but even in terms of how they can move forward on a larger scale, or as a young person or someone who is much younger, how they can consolidate with it, because it is a lot. It is a lot to take in. And sometimes that can cause climate anxiety, seeing everything that is happening. But I think the most important thing, again, is taking that education and turning it into action and constantly challenging those frameworks around you, because never stop challenging, never stop being curious, because I think once you do so, that's the means which we can continue creating and evolving our movements. And I just got a spam call, but thank you.
All righty. Thank you guys so much. We all appreciate it. Audience, please show some love in the chat with an encouraging emoji or some encouraging words. All righty, so we're gonna move on. So a big part of climate action is civic action. We intentionally launched the Climate Summit this year during Civics Week. So now we're gonna turn things over to Kaisha Handa from Young Women's Leadership High School in Astoria, Queens, and Nikita Chernin from New Dorp High School in Staten Island to talk about their work with NYC Votes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kaisha Handa, and I go to the Young Women's Leadership School of Astoria, and I'm a junior.
Hello, my name is Nikita Chernin. I go to New Dorp High School, and I'm a sophomore, and we're here with New York City Votes. And Kaisha is going to give you a pretty quick introduction to what New York City Votes is before we launch into our presentation.
So New York City Votes is actually like an initiative and a program where we as ambassadors, they've chosen ambassadors all across New York City, and we actually create efforts and create presentations, engage in different get out the vote events at our schools across the city to get the youth involved in the voting and teach them about the importance of getting involved in our municipal government. And I think that because youth voter turnout in New York City is so incredibly low, our mission is so incredibly important just to create the legislative change that I think a lot of people were mentioning earlier, in regard to climate awareness and sustainability and just a lot of these things. And again, we are the generation that's going to be impacted later on, right? So if we want to have a say in the difference in the changes that we want within our municipal government, within our city, it's important that we take things into our own hands and get involved in our voting system and municipal government. So yeah.
We're going to move on to the next slide. The next slide is a graph, and this is the overall voter turnout by age group for a few of the election years. So we have 2014, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And on the left-hand side, we have some key questions to kind of think about as we look over this data. Basically, there's local, we have several different types of elections. So we have your local election, you have your presidential election, your mayoral, and then your congressional. So 2014 was local, 16 was presidential, 17 was mayoral, and congressional, and elections happened in 2018. So it's the most primarily like the older side of the spectrum. We see that 60 to like 70 and older vote a lot. We see 50 to 59 also vote quite a lot. And the least we see is definitely the 18 to 29 to 29-year-old range, the youth, which is a big issue because a lot of the change that we want, for youth want, isn't necessarily always reflected in the older generation. We also see that presidential elections have a lot higher of a turnout than most of the other elections, followed by congressional and Senate elections, but you need action on every single level. You need everything from your local elections to the presidential elections and everything in between to have like to make the reforms that you need. While presidential election is really important, a lot of the change that, like here in New York, a lot of our change happens from our local government. So while presidential elections are really, really important, we also need some of the local support as well. And then it says, what is the impact of older people voting more frequently than younger people? I already kind of like went into it, but basically different things that people care about. Older generation might care more about issues pertaining to them versus issues pertaining to youth. They might see stuff from a different lens, which is great to see stuff from different lenses, but everyone has to have equal say in change that they want to have.
This is actually a map of the youth for voter turnout in each kind of like neighborhood within the city. So I think that you guys can kind of like acknowledge and see that the darker blue areas are where there's the most voter turnout, and you can notice how it's areas in Manhattan and a couple areas in Queens and Brooklyn. And I think that a lot of people can come to the consensus that it's because a lot of these communities have been given the knowledge about voting and have that accessible resources to them available about voting. So you can tell that a lot of these neighborhoods are predominantly white, and regions like around Queens and in the Bronx, they don't have as much youth voter turnout. And I think that just acknowledge, and again, like as we were mentioning, creating resources for students to get involved and learn about the voting process is so incredibly important, just so that they have the resources and the opportunity to engage in their government and create the change that they want to see within the government in terms of climate change and different types of just reform that they want to see, even if it isn't about staying green and engaging with the environment. But I think that because a lot of these areas, like if you can see like some of these areas mentioned, I think like if you can notice your neighborhood, sometimes are pretty they're underserved communities. And I think you can also notice a trend about how underserved communities have a lack of recycling options, and they have a lack of opportunity to just engage in the environment. So I think that it goes hand in hand in increasing the voter turnout in regions where there might not be, and helps people get involved in aspects that they would like to, that where they don't have the opportunity to do much. Yeah.
So the next slide is all about registering to vote in New York State. And I'm also going to take this time to kind of go over things that teachers and students can do to spread awareness about it. So first, registering to vote in New York State. You're eligible to register to vote if you're a US citizen, you're a New York City resident for at least 30 days. You can pre-register at 16 years old or 17 years old, but you have to be 18 to vote. And then starting on December 22nd of 2022, lawful permanent residents of New York City, so this includes green card holders and people authorized to work in New York City, can also register to vote in city elections. So that's really great for students in high school that are 16 and 17 and 18 to pre-register and register to vote. So that's something that students and teachers can kind of like know, and they need to know that like they can push this. It's really helpful to do that in like voter drives at school. Social studies classes might be a good place to start with explaining the registration process, or even helping kids get registered. The other thing is for younger students would definitely be like learning about local government specifically, because again, local government has has a bigger impact on you specifically most of the time. So that's definitely another place to start for the students that might not be old enough to register to vote or pre-register to vote. And I'm going to share the links to the New York City Vote's website and some other helpful pages in that website that go over how to register to vote and stuff like that. The New York City Votes website, it's very, very informative. It just got a rebrand recently, so it looks really cool. And there's a bunch of stuff to explore about voting and learning how to register and all of that fun stuff.
All righty, thank you, Kaisha and Nikita. We will now be opening up to audience questions. So like before, you guys can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
So I saw one of the questions is how can you pre-register to vote? I was just about to put that link in the chat. Basically, to pre-register to vote, it's really simple. You can click the link that is gonna be in chat right now, and you can scroll down and fill out the form, and it just asks a few basic questions and it will register you to vote. It's also great to check your voter registration status. It can all be done from that page that was just put into chat.
And I think someone mentioned earlier, what can students do to help raise awareness? I think just simply having the conversation about voting and just like making it a norm. I think that a lot of the time it goes over people's heads and people don't know about engaging, especially in municipal government. And like a lot of these laws and legislation impacts us directly. And I feel like sometimes we overlook it and kind of just go to the presidential elections, more elections that are more like hyped up in the media and stuff. So I think that definitely talking about it, making it a norm, and again, like telling people to pre-register. And I think there's a lot of efforts that you can get involved with New York City Votes. So I'm pretty sure Nikita put New York City Votes, the link in a chat, and there's actually a bunch of ways that you can be engaged. There's text banks that you can do, and you can host get out the vote events at your school. I've done a couple at my school, and yeah, there's a bunch of ways. If you look through, you can see a lot of ways to get involved.
Yeah, the New York City Votes website, there's a whole section all about getting involved, everything from voter trainings, which you just learn a little bit about like how to like help with efforts like that. They have youth programs, text banks, a bunch of just amazing stuff for you to learn more about everything, different workshops, different trainings. Let's see. Michael wrote in chat, is there any rules or regulations limiting or barring schools from promoting or discussing voting registration with students? I'm not entirely like completely sure on it, but I don't think that New York City has anything like that. That schools, again, some teachers might not want to talk about it. Like you shouldn't be pushing any like ideas onto people of like you have to vote this way or that way, but definitely just encouraging people to register, pre-register, learn about stuff like that, learn about why it's important to engage with local government is allowed and needs to be done in schools.
Yeah, and I think just adding on to that, like I know when I was doing Get Out the Vote events, I was just wary about a couple of things, like making sure that I was nonpartisan and I wasn't kind of like swaying towards any side when I was explaining about like getting the vote out, and also just being kind of like wary about when you're about just including everyone, because I think that there are people who are able to vote. So being kind of just careful about like people's immigration status and making sure that you don't out anyone. So that I think is a super, super big thing. Just making sure that you kind of like make it super inclusive, and people that do want to register, and people that do have their own circumstances don't have to, but you still don't out anybody. And I think that's just super important.
So there's another question in chat saying, most of my students are over 18. When I talk to them about voting, they say politics doesn't affect me or one vote doesn't matter. As students, how would you talk to your classmates about voting? Well, I'm going to address the first thing, the one vote doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. In a lot of elections, and I wish I had the data with me right now, but I can definitely find it in like while we're waiting for more questions. There have been quite a few elections that have been decided on very few votes. So your vote does matter, and especially in the smaller local elections, the votes are decided by less than by a smaller difference. So definitely your vote does matter. And then where it says politics doesn't affect me, well, it does. So kind of the best way I think to approach it would be asking students of what are things that you like to do? Let's say I'm seeing a lot of these things pop up in Manhattan, especially are these Link NYC displays, booths. And they charge your phone. So it's even as simple as I want to have my a place to charge my phone every 10 blocks. Well, who can help me do that? Well, there are people that is decided by who we vote into office. So there's these small things that they're really they might sound minuscule, but that's how you get people to engage. Unfortunately, not everyone is super involved and cares about stuff big air issues like climate change. And as much as we want people to care about them, about these issues, we have to start off small and have people work their way up to caring about these wide scale issues.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add on one last point. Again, like what I mentioned before, making it just a normal conversation and not putting too much pressure on people to vote. I think that being genuine in your vote, and being educated on it, being an uneducated voter is just as dangerous as not voting. So making sure that you're equipped with the knowledge and information that you need in order to make a well-informed vote. And again, I think that I think especially within school communities, when you have a problem with the admin, you have a problem with something that you're experiencing in school, speaking up about it and raising awareness is something that you must do. And I think this is the same thing. If you have a problem with something within New York City, whether it be in regards to environmental changes or just you want a charging station on every block, I think you have to be able to vote, even if it's the smallest thing. One vote makes a big difference. And yeah.
All righty. Thank you, Kaisha and Nikita. Again, please show them some love in the chat with some encouraging words or an emoji. I'm now going to turn things back to Pat.
All right, great. Thanks, Gabs, and thank you to all of our amazing speakers. That was incredible. Thank you to those of you who asked questions. Super engaging, great responses. You probably weren't expecting to hear from me again, but one of our other youth leadership council members is having a technical issue. This is the virtual world. So I'm going to be taking over for the climate action planning session again. So what is climate action planning? It's a really important, probably the most important part of the summit each year. So it's your chance to identify areas of climate action at your school and take initiative. So for example, some schools in the past have decided to complete an energy audit to reduce energy usage in their school, or they've contacted local elected officials to resume organics collection in New York City. Others have partnered with nearby organizations on environmental justice campaigns. So when climate action planning, you want to think about what we've learned from each of the speakers that we hear each week. So every week, there's kind of a different focus for the climate action planning. And we're running a little shorter on time today, so we'll see how far we get. But today we're going to be exploring our schools and making observations. And this will continue tomorrow and next week. And then the next 2 weeks, the middle weeks, the borough days, we'll be looking at all the photos and data that we collected from this week and deciding on an issue that we want to focus on. And then the final week on the 31st, we're going to be building out steps over the next few months to put our plan into action. So This year, we really wanted to make this first part of the climate action planning more interactive. It's traditionally just been a one-pager. We wanted to get people up and exploring their neighborhoods, exploring their school communities. So for this first week in the climate action planning, you'll be walking around your school building in and outside, taking photos and uploading them to a survey. And I'm going to show you that survey right now to give you a better idea of what that looks like. And the link will also be in the chat in a second. So it's a pretty straightforward form. How it works is you'd put in your first name, select your borough and then your school, upload the photo that you took, and then you're going to tag the photo with a relevant category. Now, one photo could cover multiple. So tag whatever categories are relevant and then provide a brief description of the photo. So you don't have to write a full sentence, just super quick. Flooded street by my school. Really short snippets. So some of these categories are pretty self-explanatory. Things like things like food and gardening, waste, water, but some of them are a little more squishy and hard to understand. So we just wanted to go through a couple examples to make sure that people know what these things actually are. So does anybody have any ideas what civic action would be? We just heard from a couple people voting. So if anybody has any ideas of an example that could count as civic action, feel free to pop it in the chat. Okay, so one example would be a poster in your school. I'm seeing some comments in the chat about getting the vote out. Yep, so like this example on the screen, student union election poster. So something in your school that's encouraging people to get involved. There might be a climate march poster in your school or something that you see on social media. Now, most photos are going to cover multiple categories, like I mentioned earlier. So does anybody have any ideas what this student union elections poster would cover in addition to civic action? I'll go back to the categories. If you had to pick another category that this might cover. Media communication, yep. Education also, media communication and education. Yeah, I think it would cover both of those. So speaking of education, this is another poster example. It could be something like a poster about an upcoming conference, like this Eco Conferences career poster. It could be a photo of a lesson that's happening in your school on a topic that one of your teachers is leading a session on. It could even be like a book or a magazine in your school about a sustainability topic. Environmental justice. Anybody have any, can anybody think of any examples of what that might be? If you could put those in the chat. And while those are coming in, I'm just going to lead you through an example. So like one example, like this image shows, would be a neighborhood or a school that's close to highways or bus depots that get a lot of air pollution and not a lot of green space. Now, this photo is clearly a Google map, so you won't be able to take a drone shot probably when you're filling out the survey, but you are welcome to explore Google Map imagery and take a screenshot. It can be helpful actually to get kind of a bird's eye view of what's around your school. Okay, so if we were looking again about another category that this environmental justice photo would cover, does anybody have any thoughts? Seeing like a highway and a lot of cars here. I think this one could also cover transportation. Okay, so under the indigenous land category, An example could be this photo is from PS14 in Queens. So they grew the Three Sisters crops in their school garden. So those are corns, beans, and squash. They're known as the Three Sisters. They were one of the main crops of the Iroquois and other Native American groups in the northeastern United States. Another example might be a lesson that your teacher leads about the Lenape, who we learned about in the opening statements. Oh, I'm seeing some guesses to come up in the chat about this first photo, if it would cover infrastructure. Yeah, I think this would. Yep. Fossil fuels, interesting guess. That's not actually one of the categories, but I like where your thoughts are going. You could enter that when you're describing the photo. You could definitely use the keyword of fossil fuels. All right, well, there's only two more examples because I know we are running short on time here, but infrastructure. Does anybody have any thoughts about what this one is? This one's a little harder. Okay, so example that we were able to pull up, or our Youth Leadership Council was able to find, was these tree guards. So they protect trees from people, animals, etc. But if they also have dirt or plants in them like this, they absorb rainwater and can help prevent flooding. Your school might also have a rain barrel that collects rain. So those would be a couple examples. And then media comms, we've already talked about it a little bit with one of the other posters. Infrastructure, I'm seeing solar energy. Yep. Green infrastructure, bioswales. Yes, that's a great example. Excuse me, moving back to this Green Club poster. So in addition to posters, which we've seen a couple of, you could have something like a social media post. That would also be an example of media and comms. And people are recognizing posters, which is great. Yeah, yeah, these are real photos that our students took. So one thing we want to think about, and Ajani touched on this, is to think outside of the box, think beyond recycling. So some questions you could ask yourself as you're exploring is, for example, what is our school's energy score? Is food being thrown away in the cafeteria? Are there any trees or gardens by our school? Or is it just a lot of parking lots? And is there a city bike station by our school? Is it empty? Are people using it, or is it full? So just some logistics. We're running short on time today, so I don't think we'll actually be able to go forth and do this right now. But good news is you have time tomorrow and next week. So when you're in school, you want to be looking around, taking photos, filling out that survey, and thinking about things that your school's doing well, but also that could use improvement. And each of your schools, you want to collectively submit at least 20 photos. If you don't have a phone or a tablet, I would recommend pairing up with a friend who has one. And if you're like, wait, what is infrastructure again? You've got your phone, so Google stuff. And if you are, ignore this last step right here. We are all going to stay together for now. We were going to have an different activity for folks who were not in their schools right now, but it's irrelevant at this point. So. Okay, so I just was talking at you for quite a while. Who has questions? And Eliza just put the link in the chat again. So that's, again, the survey that you want to fill out. That's where you're taking the photos, giving them a category, and writing a quick summary. Any questions? Is there a limit to how many photos can be sent? No, but you have to submit the survey each time you take a photo. So it sounds like a lot of work, but it's pretty quick. So once you've uploaded one and filled out all the information, I have this little image here on the screen. You can either refresh the page or you just click the Here button and it'll reload and you can take another photo and fill out the survey. Yes, there's no maximum. So the question is if there's a limit to how many photos we can all upload. Nope. Go for it. The more, the merrier. So if you want to upload more than 20, please do. And the reason we ask for 20 is because once you've submitted 20 for your school, it compiles the information, and this is what we're going to be looking at next week. It puts the information into nice charts and word clouds, and it really helps you identify what some of the trends are at your school, what are popular categories, what's not part of the discussion. Another question that someone's asking is if both teachers and students can complete the survey. Yes, I encourage that. That's totally fine.
Pat, I'm also seeing another question about if all the photos have to be on the same topic or if they can be around different categories.
No, make them different. Yes, that's the point of this exercise, is to be trying to explore all the different elements of your school, and the data will hopefully show you some trends, will help you decide, oh, this is an issue at our school. Let's focus our climate action plan on that. Definitely seek out variety. What other questions do people have?
Pat, if we're not doing this now with our green teams, when should we have all the different pictures in by?
You should have the pictures ready by the next time you're coming to the summit. So by the borough days. So if you're coming, the next one or the first one is the 16th, it's Bronx Day. Have your stuff ready to go because that's when we're going to be looking at all the photo data. I'm seeing another question. If the picture can reflect the solution the school is implementing or a picture of an existing environmental issue, it's both. Yep, so you want to be looking at things your school is doing well and problems at your school.
There's also another question about what we're going to be doing with the climate action plans for weeks 1 through 3. Would you mind walking us through that again, kind of like what we're aiming to getting towards?
Sure, yep. I'm just going back a few slides here. So this is week 1. We're doing our observations. And then this is taking all the photos, filling out the survey. Weeks 2 and 3, we are looking on the back end. There's going to be a separate link for you to look on the back end at everybody's survey results, and then you can hone in on your schools. So that's when you're looking at all the data, looking at those pretty word clouds and the charts, and you're going to identify just one broad issue and one broad goal. So that's weeks 2 and 3 during the borough weeks. And then on the 4th week, on the 31st, we are planning out the remainder of the school year and early into next school year and thinking about, okay, how can we build out steps to address this issue that we've noticed?
Yeah, another question came in about something you just touched upon of, will schools be able to access the photos after submitting them? Should they save their own copies of them?
Yep, you will be able to access them. Let me see if I have. Oh, I don't have a readily available example on the back end, but yes, what the back end will look like is you'll see charts like this and all of your student photos. And if you want, you can click on a photo and download it. but I'll have all your school's photos in one place, as well as all this chart data. We won't be sharing the information with administration. Somebody's asking if we're going to be sharing it with schools administration. Nope, this is for you to do. If you'd like to share it with them, great. We would encourage that. But no, we're not going to be following up. Our Youth Leadership Council is going to be kind of reaching out in later in the school year to check in on how things are going, but we're not actually going to be sending it off to your schools. Okay, so with that in mind, if anybody's running into issues, by the way, any questions about the survey, just shoot me an email, okay? It's right in the chat. So we're coming up on closing time. Want to be respectful of people's time for today. So next steps are to check out the Summit resource portal. So it has our schedule, resources, upcoming youth program applications and events. And then also we want to collect student information. Our YLC, like I just mentioned, is going to be reaching out with some student opportunities later in the school year. So students, please fill out this quick informational form. It's like your name and your email and your school. And that's just so that our Youth Leadership Council can get in touch with you. So that link is also going to be in the chat. It already is actually. So please fill that out right now or this evening. And Cynthia is asking a question, where do we find this form? Are you asking about the photo form or the student form to fill out? Photo form. Okay, we're going to pop that in the chat. And I'm going to send up a follow-up email that has all this information as well. But oh, we just sent it twice. Yep. So there's the link again to fill out the photo. So definitely bookmark that, save that. Again, you want to be taking photos tomorrow and all of next week. All right. There's a question about what the student form is. That is to collect student names and emails. It's voluntary. So if students want to share their contact information to create more of a youth network with our Youth Leadership Council, they're welcome to fill out the form. We'll put that in the chat again. And thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you for being active participants, and good luck with everything in the next couple weeks. I will be sticking around for a couple minutes. If folks have questions, we can hang out in here for a few minutes. But thank you all for coming.